Hello and welcome to ECC Online. Thank you for joining us. This season, we're working our way through the book of Acts. This service, Pastor Alec continues the series, Birthing a Movement, on the lame beggar.
Well, good morning. We'll try again. Good morning. Welcome to church this morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alec, and I have the privilege of being one of the pastors here at ECC. For those of you who are looking at me right now and trying to figure out what is going on with this man's glasses, most of you have been very kind to me this week who have seen me with tape wrapped around my glasses. So I was in Kenya last week. And whilst in Kenya, I lost a pair of glasses. I have no idea where they are. I don't know if they're in the back of a bus somewhere or if there's a child in Nairobi running around saying, "Look at me, I look like the Mzungu." But I came home and I've got a pair of glasses that are broken, so I've taped them together. Don't worry, I've got new glasses coming on Tuesday. But for today, I had the choice. I can either be prideful and not wear them, which means I can't see you and I can't see what I'm reading, or I suck up my pride and you see my glasses with tape on them. So I've gone for the tape today. But yeah, we're going to dive straight back into our journey through the book of Acts. And we're going to look today at Acts 3:1. And it says this. It says, "One day Peter and John were going up to the temple at the time of prayer. At 3 p.m, now a man who was lame from birth was being carried to the temple gate called Beautiful, where he was put every day to beg for those going into the temple courts. And when he saw Peter and John about to enter, he asked them for money. And Peter looked straight at him, and as did John. Then Peter said, 'Look at us.' So the man gave him his attention, expecting to get something from them. Then Peter said, 'Silver or gold I do not have, but what I do have I give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, walk.' Taking him by the right hand, he helped him up, and instantly the man's feet and ankles became strong. He jumped to his feet and began to walk. Then he went with them into the temple courts, walking and jumping and praising God. And when all the people saw him walking and praising God, they recognized him as the same man who used to sit begging at the temple gate called Beautiful. And they were filled with wonder and amazement at what had happened to him." Amen. Amen. So this morning, here at ECC, we believe that a disciple is made up of 5 things. We believe a disciple is increasingly worshiping, listening, obeying, and is transformed in all of life in teaching others to do the same. This week, I am putting into practice my listening and obeying. All week, I've been trying to steer clear of this passage and steer clear of what I feel like God is asking me to speak in this passage. And the more I tried to run away from it, the more it kept coming back. So here we are. So at some point in this passage, it's going to take a left. Just so you're aware, so you're ready for it. We're going to kind of shift direction. You may look at this passage. I told someone this week what I was speaking on, and they went, "How do you find that from here?" And I'm like, "Don't worry, we will get there." But just so you're prepared for that. So anyway, we arrive in Acts 3. In this encounter, something unique and different is beginning to happen. That we've gone through Acts 1, where we've had the ascension, and we've had Jesus coming and beginning to speak to his disciples, telling them to wait. We've had Acts 2, where they've waited, and the day of Pentecost has happened, and the walls have begun to shake, and all of that has begun to happen. And then we arrive here in Acts 3. And this is the first time that we have seen Peter and John begin to step into the power that God has got for them. It's the first time that we begin to see them without Jesus present. It's the first time that we begin to see healing happen. That all of a sudden, they are beginning to put into practice the things that God has done, the things that Jesus has taught for them. That we begin to see this here. It says, and it starts with this, "On one day, Peter and John." And my first question, as soon as I read this, is why Peter and John? Why are Peter and John together in this moment? Because there are 10 other disciples. Why are they not with someone else? Actually, as we read scripture, we realize that Peter has a brother and so does John. So John and James, Peter and Andrew. Why isn't Peter with his brother and why isn't John with his brother? Why are they together? And then we begin to realize something else, that the last time we encountered Peter and John was them on a foot race, running towards an empty tomb and discovering something, that the risen king is no longer there, that they discover the tomb is empty and they begin to ask questions around it, that we have this incredible moment happening right here. And there is this interesting thing that as we read it, that we realize that shared experience bonds us together. That when we begin to do life together, that all of a sudden we can't shake what God is doing. And there is this amazing part for us as believers, and Pastor Mark touched on it a couple of weeks ago, that we are called to do life together, that we're called to walk together, that we're called to serve together, that we're called to be in community. Bill Hull says this, he says, becoming mature disciples of Jesus means refusing to live a minimalist spiritual life in isolation. Just Jesus and me. That our Christian life isn't meant to be just Jesus and me. Have you ever heard people tell you that? Don't worry, I don't need church. I just need me and Jesus. That's all I need. Me and Jesus, and we're okay. Me and Jesus, we don't need anyone else. But actually, our Christian life isn't meant to be me and Jesus. That for the last couple of months, we, as a church, we've had our balcony closed. And I'm so great to see people on the balcony today. I'll give you a wave. Some of you are waving back. Some of you are like, whoa, what's happening? But one of the questions we get all the time is, why is the balcony not open? And the reason is this, because when we have people spread out all of our building, all of a sudden it becomes difficult for us to do life together. That as soon as we closed our balcony and began to bring people together, all of a sudden we had people in our church community going, do you still attend ECC? Yeah, I've been here every week for the last 6 years. Or the last 2 years, I've been here every week. I just sit in the balcony. And people go, oh, I sit here. Oh, it's so great. And we've begun to see church family begin to interact. So if you're at home right now because the balcony is closed, no, the reason it's still closed because you're at home, because the truth is, as soon as we are full downstairs, upstairs begins to open. But we are so thankful that we have you all here with us this morning. But there is this thought that some of us, we arrive to church late and we leave early or we leave as soon as church is finished because we just want to get in and out. But actually the truth is we're meant to do it together. That Peter and John knew this. That Peter and John, where are they going? They're headed to the temple. At the time of prayer. They're not in isolation. They're not hiding from anywhere else. They're heading to the temple at the time of prayer because they know that community is important. And finally, as we look, we see a really interesting clue here. It says it's 3 p.m. When was the last time that something special happened at 3 p.m? It was a moment that Jesus said, it is finished. That straight away, Luke the writer begins to go, something special is about to happen here. Look, resurrection power. See this, it was finished. Because we begin to be reminded that when it was finished, not only does Jesus take all our sin and all our shame, but by his stripes we are healed. And we begin to see a little bit of something coming. That we see that something is shifting. So we start with this encounter with this beggar at the beautiful gate. And as we begin to encounter this beggar, we realize that society-wise, that this man is at the bottom of society. That is where he is. That he is on the margins of society. That without begging, this man has no way of making a living. That every day he is brought to these gates and he is plunked down and he stands before and he sits before the people and he begins to ask them for alms. He begins to ask them for money. It's something that happens on a daily basis. To be fair, this beggar is smart. Because where has he placed himself? He's placed himself at the temple. Now, if you're going to find a Christian or a Jew and who are going to feel guilty about giving money, where are you going to sit? Outside church on a Sunday morning, right? Because after you spent time with Jesus and you walk past something or you walk past someone, something inside of you goes, oh, wait a minute, I need to help here. The rest of the week you go, well, I've had enough time away. No one in church can see me. But at this moment, the man is sitting here and people are walking past him. And I wonder how many people walk past him that day. It says this is the third prayer meeting of the day. This is the third set of people who walk past. They begin to think later that the church reaches 5,000 a little bit later in Acts, and they still meet in the temple. That the temple is so big, the amount of people who are walking in and out of that must have been thousands. Those are the amount of people walking past this man. And I wonder how many stopped to speak. But the truth is, this man shouldn't have been surprised that Peter and John have stopped to speak to him. That it shouldn't be a surprise to them, because the truth is, when we begin to see, because they've interacted with Jesus, and we begin to see who Jesus interacted with, we begin to realize that actually this is something that he would have done and he would have shown them. That I love, every time we have someone from the Evangelical Alliance come to speak at ECC, they share us a bit of their vision, and I always remember the end of it. It says, they always tell us the Evangelical Alliance exists to reach the least, the last, and the lost. That we realize that as a church and as a people of God, we are here to reach the least, the last, and the lost. And when I begin to look at who Jesus interacts with, the truth is, there's no way you would find me hanging out with Jesus, because I don't want to interact with those people. Maybe you lot are more Christian than I am. But when we begin to look, it says he sits with tax collectors, with prostitutes, with sinners, those on the margin of society. That if this week you were sitting here and you heard a story that Pastor Alec was sitting with a prostitute, next week you would all be going to Dave Campbell, our regional leader, and going, Pastor Alec needs to leave. There's something funny going on at ECC. But that is who Jesus is hanging around with. That is who he is with. That's why they call him a friend of sinners. And he stands there and goes, it's the sick who need the doctor, not the healthy. That we begin to see this begin to happen. I find it interesting that the people that Jesus moves towards, those at the bottom and those on the edge of society, are the people that we tend to run away from. That this man, he finds himself a strategic place. That Shane Claiborne said this, and he said this about the poor, and he said this about the church. And they did a big experiment, and he said, I asked participants who claimed to be strong followers of Jesus whether they spent time with the poor. Nearly 80% said yes. Later in the survey, I sneaked in another question. I asked the same group of strong followers whether they spent time with the poor. And less than 2% said they did. I learned a powerful lesson. We can admire and worship Jesus without doing what he did. We can applaud what he preached and stood for without caring about the same things. We can adore his cross without taking up ours. And I had come to see the great tragedy of church is not that rich Christians do not care about the poor, but that rich Christians do not know the poor. And all of a sudden, everything begins to shift. Now, this is where we're taking a left. So are you ready? Good. So we see this man, and he's seated at the beautiful gate. Now here, at the beautiful gate, there are a couple of different thoughts of what this gate leads into. And one of the thoughts, because they can't really find this beautiful gate. They know a little bit about it, but they're trying to, historians and have tried to figure out what it is. And one of the suggestions is that this gate is a place where the Gentiles would have entered into the courts. So it would have been their entrance in. And it's believed that even though this man was at the bottom of society, a beggar, that he couldn't bring himself to asking the Gentiles for money because he was too good for them. That I always find it interesting how the marginalized in society always find someone else to marginalize more. That we always find someone else to push a little bit further back than we are. that John Stott said this about the Jews and the Gentiles and how they should have worked together. He said, it's difficult for us to grasp the impossible gulf which yawned in those days between the Jews on the one hand and the Gentiles on the other. Not the Old Testament countenance such a divide. It affirmed that God had a purpose for the Gentiles, but choosing to bless the Jews, he intended to bless all the families on earth. The tragedy is that the Israelites twisted this doctrine of election into one of favoritism, became filled with racial pride and hatred, despised the Gentiles as dogs, and developed traditions to keep them apart. No Orthodox Jew would ever enter into the home of a Gentile, and all familiar intercourse with Gentiles was forbidden. That this man on the bottom of society would not demean himself to asking a Gentile for more money. That actually, when we begin to look through the book of Acts, we see that there is an undercurrent going on through this book. We see that there is a tension that the early church is beginning to grapple a hold of, and it's a racial tension. That as we look throughout the book of Acts, we see different moments where these people are struggling to allow others into their community. And it starts almost straight away in Acts 5. And it doesn't even start between Jews and non-Jews. It starts with two sets of Jews. It starts with Jews who speak Hebrew and Jews who speak Greek. And there is a big fight that begins to happen because all of a sudden the Greek Jews, the Hellenistic Jews go, we're not getting as much food as everyone else. They're not looking after us as much as they are looking after everyone else. And this begins to continue. That it begins to be pushed out. That I find it interesting that as we look and as we go through this, we come to Cornelius. And Cornelius is a Gentile, and Peter is there in the upper room, and he has this vision from God, and he sees these animals come down, and the animals say to him, eat. And he goes, I'm not eating that. It's unclean. It's unclean. And Jesus says these words, who are you to say what is unclean, what I have made clean? And we see this tension to the point that even when Cornelius comes and he invites Peter, Peter says, no way. There is no way I'm going to a Gentile's house. There is no way and he almost has to be forced into it. We see it continue a little bit later with Paul, as Paul is standing in the gap for the Gentiles and saying, no. These guys do not need to be circumcised. No, this is not the case. What is going on here? And we begin to see this tension beginning to happen between these two sets of people to the point that it says that Paul eventually goes mad at Peter. So in Galatians 2:11-13, it says, but when Peter came to Antioch, I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. When he first arrived, he ate with the Gentile believers who were not circumcised. But afterwards, when some friends of James came, Peter wouldn't eat with the Gentiles anymore. He was afraid of criticism from these people who insisted on the necessity of circumcision. And as a result, other Jewish believers followed Peter's hypocrisy, and even Barnabas was led astray by this hypocrisy. That for thousands of years, the Jewish people were told that they were a chosen people. They were told that they were elite and they were better than the nations around them. That actually, when we read through the book of Joshua, we see that actually they're told to wipe out the nations around them. They're told not to interact with them. And all of a sudden, overnight, at the cross, Jesus is going, actually, my kingdom's open for everyone. That everyone is created in my image. That everyone is my children. And the Jewish people are going, how do we wrestle with this? How do we deal with this? How do we begin to open up this thing that was only meant to be for us, and now we're being told it's for everyone? And 2,000 years later, the church is still dealing with the same problem. That 2,000 years later, we are still trying to come to grips with the same issues of racial tension, of marginalizing people who shouldn't be marginalized. Whilst I was a pastor in Newcastle upon time, and this, it's funny because I shared this story this week, and this is probably one of the reasons why I feel like God's pushed me this way. We had a godly elder in our church. His name was Rotimi Jayasimi. a Nigerian doctor, one of the top gynecologists in the country. And I remember Rotimi was one of the very first Nigerians ever to arrive in Newcastle upon Tyne, probably in the early 90s. And I remember asking Rotimi why he came to the Elam Church and what was it that brought him there. And he smiled and he went, because this is where the Nigerians came. And I went, well, that's interesting. But there was more to the story. He said that when the Nigerians and the Africans first arrived in Newcastle upon Tyne, they would go to the churches and they would worship, and they would find their local church and they would worship in it. And while they were worshiping, they would worship God, and at the end of the service, they would walk out and the pastor would put his arm around them and he would say these words to them: I don't think this is a great fit for you, but there's a church down the road that will take you. And that church was the Elam Church, because the pastor of the church there went, we're all children of God, and he welcomed everyone in. And I remember the first time I heard Rotimi tell me this story, I went, there's no way that's true. I told this story to Akin this week, and he went, there's no way that's true. And if I'm honest, if anyone else had told me that story, I'd have gone, there's no way that's true. But because I knew Rotimi and I knew his heart, I went, oh, how did the church miss the mark so much? And how today are we still missing the mark? How are we still in that place where we are marginalizing people, where people from different ethnicities, tribes, languages, sexes, that we are continuously going, actually, how do we begin to draw us together? How do we begin to piece it together? How do we begin to pull it together? That know this morning, that you are created in the image of God. That God created you. That it says at the beginning of Genesis that he made us male and female in the image of God. That not just male. That it's not just me made in the image of God, but male and female. That everyone in this room is made in the image of God. And there's this interesting moment here, actually, as we begin to move through these scriptures. It says that Peter looks at this beggar and he says, look at us. He says, look at us. He says, look at us. All of a sudden, this man has been looking at the floor for so long, and they get him to look up. And they look him straight in the eye, because all of a sudden, in this moment, they want to begin to put the dignity back into him. They want to begin to show him who he is. And it's that moment where all of a sudden Peter and John begin to realize that actually to elevate this man, and sometimes to elevate us, there's a moment where we begin to realize actually we need to put the image of God back into us. That we need to understand that we are created to look like him. That me standing on the stage, this Scottish white man, I am made in the image of God. That Akin is made in the image of God. That Cheryl is made in the image of God. That Nirmal is made in the image of God. That Micah is made in the image of God. That Astrid is made in the image of God. Why don't you say it over yourselves? I am made in the image of God. That is a truth this morning that nothing can rip it away. For years, people have been telling us, or people have been telling you, that you are not good enough. That you are not created. They've been stripping us away. They've been stripping away people's identity and beginning to go, actually, there is something here. I love our church. I stand here on a Sunday morning on a regular basis and I go, God, how am I here? How am I in this place? How is this even possible? Because I'm from Fraserburgh. I'm actually from Inveralkie. The first time I ever encountered someone from Africa properly, I was 18 years old, and I was sharing a room with him, and I think he was more afraid of me than I was of him. I remember one morning we were sharing a room together, and I woke up in the morning, and this boy is tickling my feet. And I'm going, I don't know what goes on in Mozambique, but I'm worried. And I'm not sure if he was trying to figure out if I was real, or if this is just a greeting that they give in the morning to wake me up. But I love the fact that as a community, we gather together. That I love the fact that in our church, that there are people from all over the world. That the more I begin to interact with different continents and different people, I begin to understand how all of this begins to piece together. That I realize that and I remember sitting with a pastor one time and asking a question about young people in Newcastle, and he stopped and he went, you realize that diversity in your church is unbelievable because you won't find some of these people interacting outside of this environment. And I began to, the more I interact, my wife is West African, from Ghana, and everywhere we go, there is always super malt. And I only turn up to parties because there's super malt there. Until I turned up to a party of some of our Zambians, and I went, where's the super malt? And they went, we don't have super malt here. I went, hey, if I'd known that, I wouldn't have come to the party. As I begin to grapple with all those different nationalities and our Caribbeans, and not just Caribbeans, but Grenadians and Jamaicans and Trinis and Ghanaians and Nigerians and Ivory Coast and Kenyans and Tanzanians and Zambians and Zimbabweans and South Africans and our Brazilians and our Colombians and our Guyanans and our Sri Lankans and our Indians and our Filipinos, I begin to realize that there's something beautiful happens here. That actually as we gather together, that there's something special that happens. We begin to reflect something that the world is crying out for. That we begin to see something different. That we begin to see a dignity being put back into people once again. And can I encourage you this morning? That if you come to church and the only people you know are the people from the same country as you, there's an opportunity here to get to know some new people. There's an opportunity here to get to know people who are from different places. Because the truth is, every time I turn up somewhere and there's a Scottish person there, I spend 5 minutes with them and go, I don't actually like you. We're not the same. But actually, there's something important about us beginning to gather. Then can I hold this truth for some of you as well? As I was preparing, I had this morning that there's some of you here in our congregation who every so often someone gives you a phone and goes, why are you in that church? Why are you not worshiping with your own people? In Ghana, they use the phrase for white man, obroni, and then for pastor, sofo. And it's probably a few of the words that I know, because every time I travel someone, it's the reason I know Mzungu, because as I traveled to Kenya, I heard it quickly, and often as kids pointed at me, and I went, oh, that means white man. And when I was in Ghana, I picked the same thing. And every so often, someone comes to you and goes, why are you in the church with the Abrono or Sofo? Why are you in the church with the white man as the pastor? You should be with us. You should be with people who sound and speak and know who you are. But God has placed you here for a reason. That you're not here by chance. That He's placed you here for a reason. And know that you're always welcome and you're always loved. Here at ECC, we believe that God has called you to something greater. And He looks at this man, He says, come and look at us. Like I said, last week I was in Kenya, and while I was there, I was sitting with this 11-year-old girl. Her name was Michelle. Michelle lives in a slum in Nairobi. And as I was sitting with Michelle, she asked, at the end of our conversation, she asked me this question. She went, do you have anything to give me that I can remember you by? Now, I know because we've been told, because I was out with Compassion, we were told, actually, you can't give any money at this moment. But the truth is, I had nothing to give. So I tried to share a memory with her and show her a picture of my boys, and she went, no. Do you have anything that you can give me? And in a moment, I stopped, and my heart broke because I went, I've got nothing to give you. I don't know what to do in this situation. And for moments throughout my life, there are things that I interact with and things that I hear where I go, I don't know what to do in this situation. And even in this topic right now of racial injustice and how we begin to grab a hold of it as a church, there's moments where I have no idea. I have no idea the pain that some of you have experienced. I have no idea the comments that you've experienced. I have no idea what it feels like to be you, because I understand that my experience is completely different. That there are moments where I walk into rooms and no one bats an eyelid. Whereas I know that for some of you, when you walk into rooms, that everyone stops and stares. And in those moments when you say, I will sit and I cry, But the truth is, sometimes I have no idea what to do. But I know someone who does. That in this moment, Peter and John, they look at this man and they say, silver and gold we don't have. That sometimes I look and I go, I don't know what I have. But what I have, we can give to you in the name of Jesus Christ. Rise up and walk. And it says this man goes walking and leaping and praising God. That all of a sudden this man, he moves from the bottom of society to all of a sudden being an asset to society once again. He moves from being in a place where everyone is ignoring him to the point where everyone looks and goes, is this the man? All of a sudden, he becomes the center of attention. That all of a sudden, his story is turned around. That not only is he healed physically, but he's also healed emotionally and spiritually all at the same time. And Jesus doesn't just come to heal us physically. He doesn't just care about the miracle, but he wants us to have life, and life in all its fullness. And that is the call, and that is the promise for you this morning, that maybe this morning you are sitting here and you're going, how do I deal with this? How do I move forward from this? How do we go along with this? What does this look like? And maybe you've experienced so much pain that you go, I don't know if I can ever release this. And maybe in a moment, God's saying, actually, it's time for us to begin to do a little bit of forgiveness, a little bit of reconciliation, and a little bit of going, okay, God, I need you to remind me that my humanity is being stripped so much that when I look at our world doesn't have a confusion problem. It has an identity problem. It has a problem of people forgetting and people being told they aren't made in the image of God. But the truth is, we all are. That everyone in this room is made in his image. That you are perfect. It says that you are beautifully and wonderfully made. That when Jesus looked and he finished with humanity, he doesn't just look and he said everything else he makes. He says it is good. But when he looked at you and he made you, he said these words, it is very good. Not just it is good, it is very good. And then he took a break. Because when he made you, he went, this is the pinnacle. This is the pinnacle of my creation. I need a day off.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's message. We would love to hear from you. Just leave a comment below. If you want to catch the full service live, please join us next Sunday at 10:30 a.m., either online or in the building. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. We hope to see you next week.